The vultures' shadows danced like dark specters across the canyon floor as Cassandra Jenkins opened her eyes to what she'd believed would be her final day on Earth. Her cracked lips parted in a silent prayer, the taste of dust and desperation thick on her tongue as the circling birds descended ever lower in the afternoon heat of 1872. Cassandra had been wandering for 3 days since the stagecoach robbery. 3 days since she'd watched her family's lifeless bodies crumple to the ground under the bandits' merciless gunfire. 3 days of stumbling through the unforgiving Colorado wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of unbearable grief crushing her chest. Now, collapsed against the sun-scorched rocks of a narrow canyon outside Platteville, she had finally surrendered to fate. The largest vulture swooped lower, its wingspan impressive against the cloudless blue sky. Cassandra closed her eyes, too weak to even raise a hand in defense. The beating of wings grew louder, and then a gunshot cracked through the canyon. "That's far enough, you ugly buzzards," a man's voice boomed. Cassandra's eyes fluttered open as the vultures scattered in a flurry of indignant squawks. Through the haze of dehydration, she saw a tall figure dismounting from a chestnut stallion. The stranger's face was shadowed beneath a worn leather hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Madam," he called, approaching cautiously, "you alive down there?" She tried to respond, but her throat was too dry. A weak moan escaped her lips instead. The man knelt beside her, and she caught a glimpse of kind blue eyes examining her with concern. "Name's Isaac Baxter," he said, uncorking a canteen. "Looks like I found you just in time." He lifted her head gently, pressing the canteen to her lips. The water felt like heaven as it trickled down her parched throat. "Slowly now," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." Cassandra sipped obediently, strength gradually seeping back into her limbs. "Can you tell me your name, madam?" Isaac asked, his voice low and steady. "Cassandra," she managed. "Cassandra Jenkins, Miss Jenkins, what on earth are you doing out here alone?" Tears welled in her eyes as memories flooded back. "Stagecoach, robbery," she whispered, 3 days ago. "They killed everyone. My parents, my brother, I ran, just kept running." Isaac's expression darkened. "The Watson Pass robbery, we heard about that in town." He glanced at the sky, which was beginning to take on the orange hue of approaching sunset. "We need to get you somewhere safe before nightfall. Can you stand?" When she shook her head weakly, Isaac carefully gathered her into his arms. Despite her circumstances, Cassandra felt a flicker of embarrassment at being held so intimately by a stranger. But she was too exhausted to protest as he settled her onto his horse and mounted behind her. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here," he explained, one arm securing her against his chest while the other held the reins. "We'll get you fixed up proper there." As they rode, Cassandra drifted in and out of consciousness, lulled by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the unexpected security of Isaac's arms. She had been ready to die, convinced there was nothing left to live for. Now, cradled against this stranger's chest, something stirred within her, a tiny, unwelcome spark of hope that perhaps her story wasn't finished after all. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains when they arrived at a modest homestead nestled in a valley. A small log cabin stood proudly near a creek with a barn and corral nearby. It wasn't grand, but it radiated the care of someone who'd built a life with their own hands. "Welcome to my humble abode," Isaac said as he guided his horse toward the cabin. "It ain't much, but it's home." A young boy of about 12 came running from the barn, his face lighting up at the sight of Isaac before shifting to confusion when he spotted Cassandra. "Uncle Isaac, who's that lady? Is she hurt?" "Thomas, run ahead and turn down the bed," Isaac instructed. "This is Miss Jenkins. Found her in Canyon Creek in a bad way. She needs rest and care." The boy nodded earnestly and dashed inside. By the time Isaac carried Cassandra through the door, Thomas had prepared a small bed in the corner of the main room. "Thank you, Thomas," Isaac said. "Now fetch some clean water and the medicine kit." As Isaac gently laid her on the bed, Cassandra finally got a clear look at her rescuer. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His blue eyes seemed to hold both strength and gentleness. "My nephew," Isaac explained, nodding toward Thomas, who was bustling about with supplies. "My sister's boy. She passed 2 winters ago from fever." Cassandra's heart clenched at the matter-of-fact way he mentioned such loss, recognizing in his voice the same hollow acceptance she would soon need to find. "I'm sorry for your trouble," she whispered. Isaac shook his head. "No need for that, you just rest now." Over the next 2 days, Cassandra drifted between sleep and wakefulness as her body recovered from the ordeal. Isaac and Thomas tended to her with unexpected tenderness, bringing broth and water, applying cool cloths to her forehead when fever briefly took hold, speaking in hushed voices to avoid disturbing her rest. On the 3rd morning, Cassandra woke feeling significantly stronger. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows, and she could hear voices outside. Pushing herself to a sitting position, she noticed clean clothes folded at the foot of her bed, a simple cotton dress that would be too large for her frame but far better than her tattered, dust-covered garments. After changing, she made her way unsteadily to the door. Outside, Isaac was chopping wood while Thomas fed chickens in a small pen. Both looked up when the cabin door creaked open. "Well, look who's up and about," Isaac said, setting down his axe. "How are you feeling, Miss Jenkins?" "Better," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Thanks to you both." Isaac approached, studying her face with a critical eye. "Colors coming back, that's good. Hungry?" When she nodded, he guided her to a rough-hewn table beneath a large oak tree. Thomas brought out a plate of eggs and biscuits, watching eagerly as she took her first bite. "These are delicious," Cassandra said, genuinely surprised at the quality of the food. Thomas beamed. "Uncle Isaac taught me how to cook. He says a man needs to know his way around a kitchen same as a woman." Isaac ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Why don't you go check on that mare, Thomas? She looked ready to foal yesterday." Once Thomas was out of earshot, Isaac turned to Cassandra with a more serious expression. "Miss Jenkins, I hate to bring up painful matters, but I need to ask about what happened. The sheriff in Platteville should be informed if there are outlaws targeting the pass." Cassandra set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished. "I was traveling with my parents and younger brother from St. Louis. My father had purchased land near Denver." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "The stagecoach was stopped by 4 men in bandanas. They demanded valuables, but something went wrong. One of the men recognized my father." "Did you know any of them?" Isaac asked gently. She shook her head. "They kept their faces covered, but the leader called my father by name, said something about finally catching up with him. When my father reached for his gun, Her voice broke. "They shot everyone. I was outside the coach, had stepped down to retrieve my handkerchief moments before. I hid under the coach, then ran when they were distracted with the strongbox." Isaac's jaw tightened. "You're lucky to be alive." "Am I?" Cassandra whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Everyone I loved died on that road. I have nothing, no family, no money, no home." Isaac was silent for a long moment. "What were you planning to do in that canyon before the vultures found you?" She looked away. "I wasn't planning anything. I was just waiting to join my family." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Miss Jenkins, please," she interrupted. "Call me Cassandra." "Cassandra," he amended. "Life has dealt you a cruel hand, no mistake about that, but giving up isn't the answer, trust me on that." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." A shadow crossed his face. "Maybe I do. Lost my wife and infant daughter to childbirth 5 years back. Thought the world had ended. Came mighty close to ending things myself." "What stopped you?" she asked softly. "My sister needed me. Thomas needed me." He gestured toward the homestead. "This land needed me. Grief doesn't last forever, Cassandra. It changes shape, becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it." His words touched something deep inside her, not healing the wound exactly, but offering the first glimpse of a path forward. "I should go to Platteville," she said after a while. "Report what happened to the sheriff. Maybe telegram my father's lawyer in St. Louis." Isaac nodded. "We'll ride into town tomorrow if you're strong enough. For now, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." That evening, Cassandra insisted on helping prepare dinner. desperate for any activity to distract from her thoughts. Thomas eagerly showed her around the kitchen corner of the cabin, proudly demonstrating his cooking skills. Isaac watched them from his chair by the fireplace, a small smile playing on his lips. Uncle Isaac was a cook in the war, Thomas informed her. For the Union, says he fed half of General Grant's army. That's a stretch, Thomas, Isaac chuckled. I was just one of many camp cooks. Nothing special about keeping hungry soldiers from starving. Which battles were you in? Cassandra asked, curious about this man who had saved her life. Shiloh, Vicksburg, few others. His tone discouraged further questions. War's not something I care to remember much. Cassandra nodded, understanding all too well the desire to avoid painful memories. After dinner, Thomas went to check on the animals, leaving Cassandra and Isaac alone. She helped wash the dishes, acutely aware of his presence as he moved about the cabin, stoking the fire and bringing in more wood. Your nephew is a wonderful boy, she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Isaac smiled fondly. He's a good kid, smart as a whip too. Been teaching him reading and figures best I can, but he deserves proper schooling. No school nearby, Platteville has one, but it's too far to go daily. Been thinking of sending him to my cousin in Denver next year. Isaac's expression grew somber. He deserves more than what I can give him here. You've given him a loving home, Cassandra observed. That's worth more than you might think. Isaac looked at her thoughtfully. You're right about that. After everything, you still see the good in things. Not everything, she admitted, but I'm trying. That night, lying in the small bed, Cassandra listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Thomas was asleep in the loft above, while Isaac had insisted on taking a bedroll by the fire. The familiar ache of grief remained in her chest, but alongside it was something new, a tentative gratitude for being alive to see another day. The next morning, they set out for Platteville. Cassandra rode behind Isaac on his horse, while Thomas followed on a gentle mare. The town was a half-day's ride, and as they traveled, Cassandra found herself studying the landscape with new eyes. The rolling hills and distant mountains no longer seemed like an indifferent witness to her suffering, but rather a testament to endurance and beauty that persisted despite hardship. Pretty country, Isaac remarked, noticing her gaze. First time I saw these mountains after the war, I knew I'd found home. How long have you had your ranch? Going on 5 years now. Started with nothing but that cabin and 10 acres, up to 40 acres now with a small herd of cattle and some good horses. Pride colored his voice. It's good land, honest work. Platteville came into view around midday, a small but bustling settlement with a main street lined with wooden buildings. Several wagons and horses were tied up outside the general store, and the saloon already seemed to be doing brisk business. Isaac guided them to a modest building with a sign declaring it the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller's a good man, he told Cassandra. Served with him during the war, he'll help you sort things out. Sheriff Miller was a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard and shrewd eyes that softened when Isaac introduced Cassandra and explained her situation. Terrible business, that stagecoach robbery, Miller said, shaking his head. We found the coach and the bodies 2 days after. Buried them proper in the town cemetery, assumed all passengers were accounted for. Cassandra swallowed hard. My family, they're buried here, the sheriff nodded solemnly. Yes, madam, I can take you there after we finish our business here. For the next hour, Cassandra recounted everything she remembered about the robbery. Sheriff Miller listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarifications about the bandits' appearances or voices. The fact that they recognized your father concerns me, he said when she'd finished. Suggests this wasn't a random holdup. Any idea why someone would target Daniel Jenkins specifically? Cassandra shook her head. My father was a merchant in St. Louis, well respected as far as I knew. I'll send telegrams to the St. Louis authorities, see what we can learn. Miller scratched some notes in his logbook. In the meantime, where will you be staying, Miss Jenkins? Before she could answer, Isaac cleared his throat. Miss Jenkins is welcome at my ranch until matters are settled. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Very well. I'll send word when I have news. After leaving the sheriff's office, Isaac led them to the telegraph office, where Cassandra sent messages to her father's lawyer and bank in St. Louis. The operator warned it might be several days before replies arrived. Their final stop was the cemetery on the town's outskirts. Isaac and Thomas respectfully waited by the gate as Cassandra approached 3 fresh graves marked with simple wooden crosses. Each bore a name: Daniel Jenkins, Eleanor Jenkins, William Jenkins. Kneeling beside them, Cassandra was surprised to find her tears came not in the torrent she expected, but in a gentle stream. She spoke softly to each grave, promising to live the life they would have wanted for her. When she finally rose, she felt a strange calm, not peace exactly, but a step toward it. Isaac said nothing when she returned to him, simply offering his arm for support as they walked back to the horses. His quiet understanding was more comforting than any words could have been. They spent another hour in town, purchasing supplies and a few necessities for Cassandra. At the general store, Isaac insisted on buying her a new dress and practical riding clothes. "I can't accept such generosity," she protested. "I have no way to repay you." "Consider it an investment," he replied. "You'll need proper clothes if you're staying at the ranch. Can't have you working in that city dress." "Working?" she echoed. A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Unless you plan to be a guest forever, ranch always needs extra hands." The idea of staying longer than a few days hadn't occurred to her. "I wouldn't know the first thing about ranch work." "Thomas will teach you," Isaac said with a wink toward his nephew, who puffed up with importance. "I'm an excellent teacher, Miss Cassandra." As they rode back to the ranch, Cassandra found herself viewing the landscape differently, not as a traveler passing through, but with the eyes of someone who might belong. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. The next several days fell into a rhythm. True to his word, Thomas enthusiastically showed Cassandra the basics of ranch life: feeding chickens, collecting eggs, tending the vegetable garden. Isaac taught her to ride properly on a gentle mare named Daisy, and soon she was accompanying him on his daily rounds of the property. One evening, about a week after her arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Thomas had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of helping Isaac mend fences. "I received a telegram from Mr. Hargrove today," Cassandra said, referring to her father's lawyer. "He confirmed my father's land purchase near Denver was legitimate. The deed is being held at the bank there." Isaac turned to her. "That's good news." "Yes," she agreed. "And apparently there's some money in my father's account, not a fortune, but enough to start over. So you'll be heading to Denver soon." His voice was carefully neutral. Cassandra looked out at the darkening landscape. "I suppose I should. It's what my father would have wanted for me to claim the land he worked so hard to acquire." "What do you want, Cassandra?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, she had moved through life according to others' expectations, her parents' societies. Even her grief had followed a prescribed path. What did she truly want? "I don't know," she admitted. "A week ago I wanted to die. Now," she gestured vaguely at the ranch, "I find myself looking forward to tomorrow, to learning new things, to being useful." Isaac's expression softened. "That's a start." "Sheriff Miller also sent word," she continued. "He's been investigating the robbery. Apparently my father was carrying documents that might have been valuable to certain parties. The sheriff thinks that might be why they were targeted." "What kind of documents?" "Land deeds, mining rights. Father was bringing them to Denver for filing." She sighed. "I never paid much attention to his business affairs. Perhaps I should have." They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled over the ranch. Stars emerged, brilliant against the black canvas of night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. "My wife loved the stars," Isaac said unexpectedly. "Emma used to say that no matter how small we feel under them, they're proof that beauty exists even in darkness." Cassandra glanced at him, touched by this rare mention of his wife. "She sounds like a wise woman, smartest person I ever knew." A sad smile played on his lips. "Would have liked you, I think." Before Cassandra could respond, a horse's whinny from the barn caught their attention. Isaac rose quickly. "That's Bella, the mare about to foal. Might be time." He offered his hand, and without hesitation, Cassandra took it, allowing him to help her up. His hand was warm and calloused, strong from years of hard work. A strange flutter stirred in her chest as their eyes met briefly in the moonlight. They spent the next several hours in the barn as Bella gave birth to a healthy colt. Cassandra assisted as Isaac guided her, handing him tools and cloths, soothing the mare with gentle words. When the newborn foal finally stood on wobbly legs and found its mother's milk, she felt a surge of joy unlike anything she'd experienced since before the tragedy. "Life goes on," Isaac murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "Always finds a way." By the time they returned to the cabin, dawn was breaking. Thomas was still asleep, so they moved quietly, brewing coffee and sitting at the table in comfortable silence. Cassandra was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "Thank you for including me in that," she said. "It was beautiful." Isaac studied her over his coffee cup. "You did well. Most city folks would have fainted at the sight." "I'm tougher than I look," she replied with a small smile. His eyes held hers. "I'm starting to see that." 2 days later, Sheriff Miller rode out to the ranch with news. The bandits responsible for the stagecoach robbery had been identified, a gang led by a man named Curtis Holloway, known to have connections with land speculators trying to control Denver's expansion. "Your father's land purchases threatened their schemes," Miller explained. "They're still at large, but we've alerted authorities across 3 territories. It's just a matter of time." "Will Miss Jenkins need to testify if they're caught?" Isaac asked, concern evident in his voice. "Most likely," the sheriff admitted, "but that could be months away, if ever." He turned to Cassandra. "In the meantime, Miss Jenkins, have you decided what you'll do about your father's property?" "I plan to travel to Denver next week to assess the situation," she replied. The decision had been made that morning, after a sleepless night weighing her options. Isaac's expression remained neutral, but she noticed his shoulders tense slightly. "Thomas and I will accompany you," he said. "Safer that way with those outlaws still free." Sheriff Miller nodded approvingly. "Wise precaution." He rose to leave, tipping his hat to Cassandra. "I'll send word if there are any developments." After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between Cassandra and Isaac. Thomas, oblivious to the tension, chattered excitedly about seeing Denver. "Never been to a big city before," the boy said. "Is it true they have electric lights on the streets?" "Some areas do," Cassandra confirmed, "and buildings taller than you can imagine." As Thomas peppered her with questions, Isaac excused himself to tend to the horses. Cassandra watched him go, a heaviness settling in her chest. These past 2 weeks at the ranch had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The idea of leaving, even temporarily, filled her with unexpected sadness. That evening, while Thomas was busy with his chores, Cassandra found Isaac in the barn, brushing down his stallion. "You don't have to take us to Denver," she said. "I can hire a driver in Platteville." Isaac continued brushing, his movements methodical. "I said I'd take you, and I will, Isaac." Something in her tone made him pause and look at her. "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything. You didn't just save my life in that canyon, you showed me it was still worth living." His eyes softened. "You did the hard part yourself, Cassandra." She stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "I don't know what awaits me in Denver, but I want you to know these weeks here have meant more than I can express." Isaac set down the brush, turning to face her fully. The lantern light cast golden shadows across his features, highlighting the strength and kindness written there. "This place hasn't felt so alive since Emma died," he said quietly. "Having you here, it's been good for Thomas, good for me too." Cassandra's heart quickened. "I've felt more at home here than I ever did in St. Louis." They stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Isaac cleared his throat. "Denver's a fine city, lots of opportunities for a lady with land and education." "Yes," she agreed, "but I'm discovering I'm not the lady I thought I was." His brow furrowed in confusion. The Cassandra who boarded that stagecoach would have been horrified at the thought of birthing foals and mending fences, she explained with a small smile. She would have found this life beneath her station. And now I understand there's honor in working with your hands, in building something real. She gestured toward the ranch beyond the barn doors. What you've created here, it's worth more than all the parlors and parties in St. Louis. A smile slowly spread across Isaac's face, transforming his usual serious expression. High praise from a city lady. I'm not sure I qualify as that anymore, she laughed, then sobered. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I'll return from Denver, if you'll have me. Isaac took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. And what exactly would we be having you as, Miss Jenkins? Cassandra felt a blush creep up her neck. That depends on what's being offered, Mr. Baxter. For a breathless moment, they stood on the precipice of something new and terrifying and wonderful. Then, slowly, Isaac reached out and took her hand in his. I lost someone I loved once, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Swore I'd never risk that pain again. I understand, she whispered. But watching you these past weeks, seeing your strength, your kindness with Thomas, the way you face each day despite your grief, he squeezed her hand gently. You make me want to risk it, Cassandra. Before she could respond, Thomas's voice called from outside the barn. Uncle Isaac. Miss Cassandra, dinner's ready. The moment broke, but something had changed between them. As they walked back to the cabin side by side, their hands occasionally brushed against each other, each touch sending a current of awareness through Cassandra. The journey to Denver took 3 days, with overnight stops at roadhouses along the way. Thomas was enthralled by everything: the changing landscape, the increasingly busy roads as they approached the city, the sight of the mountains growing larger on the horizon. Cassandra watched his excitement with fondness, while also observing the subtle changes in Isaac. As they drew closer to Denver, he became more withdrawn, his jaw set in a tight line. On their final evening before reaching the city, as Thomas slept in their shared room at the roadhouse, she finally addressed it. You don't like cities, do you? Isaac looked up from cleaning his revolver. That obvious? You've barely spoken since we left the last town. She sat beside him at the small table. Is it just cities in general, or Denver specifically? He sighed, setting the gun aside. After the war, I drifted for a while, ended up in Denver working at the stockyards, met Emma there. A shadow crossed his face. After she died, I couldn't bear to stay. Too many memories, haven't been back since. Cassandra covered his hand with hers. We don't have to go, I could hire someone. No, he interrupted firmly. I need to face it sometime. Besides, his expression softened, someone needs to make sure you don't get swindled by some smooth-talking city lawyer. She smiled, touched by his protectiveness. My hero. Denver was larger and more developed than Cassandra had expected. Streets bustled with activity, horse-drawn carriages and wagons navigating between elegant brick buildings and wooden storefronts. Signs advertised everything from mining supplies to fine millinery. The contrast with Platteville's single main street was striking. Their first stop was the First National Bank, where Cassandra presented her identification and father's paperwork to a skeptical manager who eventually confirmed her inheritance, a modest sum of money, and the deed to 120 acres northeast of the city. The land is undeveloped but well situated, the banker explained. With the railroad expansion, values in that area have doubled in the past year. Isaac, who had been silent during the meeting, spoke up. Any recent inquiries about purchasing that particular parcel? The banker hesitated. Several, actually. One gentleman was quite persistent, a Mr. Holloway representing Western Development Company. Cassandra and Isaac exchanged alarmed glances at the familiar name. When was his last inquiry? Isaac asked. Just last week. Said he'd return this Friday. The banker looked between them curiously. Is there a problem? Possibly, Cassandra said carefully. We should speak with the sheriff. Denver's sheriff, a no-nonsense man named Wallace, listened to their story with increasing concern. Curtis Holloway is well known to us, he confirmed. Suspected of land fraud, intimidation, even murder, but nothing we've been able to prove. His connection to Western Development gives him an air of legitimacy. He murdered my family for that land, Cassandra said, her voice tight with anger. He can't be allowed to profit from it. Sheriff Wallace leaned forward. If he comes to the bank as expected, we could set a trap, but it would require your cooperation, Miss Jenkins, and considerable risk. Isaac immediately objected. Absolutely not. She's not bait for a killer. It may be our only chance to catch him, the sheriff argued. I'll do it, Cassandra declared, her mind made up. If it means bringing my family's killers to justice, I'll do whatever it takes. Despite Isaac's continued protests, a plan was formed. Cassandra would meet with Holloway at the bank, pretending to consider his offer for the land. Sheriff Wallace and his deputies would be positioned nearby, ready to arrest Holloway if he revealed any knowledge of the stagecoach robbery that only the perpetrator could know. Thomas was left in the care of the hotel staff with strict instructions not to leave the building, while Isaac insisted on being present at the bank, posing as Cassandra's financial advisor. The next morning, Cassandra dressed in her finest clothes, the new dress Isaac had purchased in Platteville, her hair arranged carefully. She looked every inch the vulnerable, naive young woman that Holloway would expect. "You don't have to do this," Isaac said as they prepared to leave their hotel room. "We can find another way." Cassandra adjusted his tie, an unfamiliar addition that made him look uncharacteristically formal. "There is no other way. I need to look him in the eyes, the man who destroyed my family." Isaac captured her hands in his. "Promise me you'll be careful. Don't take unnecessary risks." "I promise," she said solemnly. "Besides, I have you to protect me, don't I?" The meeting was set for 10 o'clock. Cassandra and Isaac arrived early, reviewing the plan with the bank manager and Sheriff Wallace. Deputies were positioned throughout the bank and outside, disguised as customers and passers-by. At precisely 10, Curtis Holloway strode into the bank. He was younger than Cassandra had expected, perhaps 40, well-dressed with a meticulously groomed mustache and cold, calculating eyes. Nothing in his appearance suggested a violent criminal, which made him all the more dangerous. "Miss Jenkins," he greeted her with practiced charm. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I was deeply sorry to hear about your family's tragic accident." Cassandra fought to keep her expression neutral, though rage boiled inside her at his casual reference to the murders he'd orchestrated. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. This is my advisor, Mr. Baxter." Isaac nodded curtly, his body tense as a drawn bow. They settled in the bank manager's office, where Holloway presented his offer for the land, a sum that was substantial but well below its actual value. "As a woman alone in the world, you'd be wise to accept liquid assets rather than the burden of undeveloped property," Holloway advised with patronizing concern. "The West is no place for an unprotected lady." "I've managed thus far," Cassandra replied evenly. "Though I admit the stagecoach journey proved more dangerous than anticipated," Holloway's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. "Yes, the roads can be treacherous. Bandits are a constant problem. Curious that they took nothing of value from the coach," she continued, heart pounding. "Only my father's document case." A flash of wariness crossed Holloway's face. "Is that so? How odd." "Odd indeed," Isaac interjected. Almost as if they were looking for something specific, Holloway's eyes narrowed as he studied Isaac more carefully. "Have we met before, Mr. Baxter?" "You seem familiar." "I don't believe so," Isaac replied coolly. "I would remember." Tension crackled between the men as Holloway slowly reached into his jacket. "Perhaps you're right, memory can be unreliable. Everything happened at once." Holloway drew a concealed pistol, but Isaac was faster, lunging across the desk to tackle him. The gun discharged, the bullet splintering wood inches from Cassandra's head. She screamed, diving beneath the desk as Sheriff Wallace and his deputies burst into the room. In the chaos that followed, Holloway was subdued and disarmed. Blood streamed from his nose where Isaac's fist had connected, and he spat curses as the deputies shackled him. "You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Miss Jenkins and Mr. Baxter," Wallace announced, "and suspected involvement in the Watson Pass stagecoach robbery and murders." "You have nothing on me," Holloway snarled. "Nothing? We have your gun," the sheriff countered. "Which I suspect will match bullets recovered from the robbery scene, and witnesses who'll testify you've been trying to acquire the Jenkins property by any means necessary." As Holloway was led away, still protesting his innocence, Cassandra emerged from beneath the desk, shaking but unhurt. Isaac immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "Are you all right?" he murmured into her hair. She nodded, unable to speak as delayed fear and relief washed over her in equal measure. His heartbeat thundered against her ear, his arms solid and secure around her. "Let's get out of here," Isaac said, glaring at the curious onlookers gathering outside the office. "Thomas will be worried sick." They returned to the hotel, where Thomas greeted them with a mixture of excitement and concern upon learning what had transpired. That evening, Sheriff Wallace brought news Holloway had broken under questioning and implicated 3 accomplices, all of whom were now being sought by lawmen across the territory. "He'll hang for what he did," Wallace assured them. "Justice will be served." After the sheriff left, Cassandra stood by the hotel window, watching the city lights come alive as dusk settled over Denver. Isaac approached, standing beside her in companionable silence. "What will you do with the land?" he asked eventually. She'd been pondering that question all afternoon. "Sell it, I think, but not to Western Development, to someone who will use it honorably." Isaac nodded approval, and then Cassandra turned to face him fully. "And then, if the offer still stands, I'd like to return to a certain ranch near Platteville. There's a young boy there who needs proper cooking lessons and a rancher who could use a partner." Isaac's eyes widened. "A partner? In whatever capacity he might desire," she said softly. For a moment, Isaac simply looked at her, wonder and hope battling in his expression. Then, with gentle deliberation, he cupped her face in his calloused hands and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, a question rather than a demand. When Cassandra responded, sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more urgent, more passionate, a promise of things to come. "I never expected to find you," Isaac whispered when they finally parted. "In that canyon with the vultures circling you looked like a fallen angel." "You saved me," she murmured. He shook his head. "No, Cassandra, you saved yourself. I just scared off some birds and gave you water. You gave me much more than that," she insisted. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I'd lost all hope." Isaac pressed his forehead against hers. "Then stay with me. Build a life with me. It won't be easy, ranching never is, but we'll face it together." "Yes," she breathed, the word both an answer and a beginning. Thomas's delighted whoop from across the room startled them apart. "Does this mean Miss Cassandra is staying forever?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "Are you getting married?" Isaac laughed, the sound rich and free in a way Cassandra had never heard before. "That depends on whether she'll have me, young man." Cassandra's heart swelled with affection for them, both this good man and the boy who'd become so dear to her in such a short time. "I believe I already answered that question," she said with a smile. They remained in Denver for another week, finalizing the sale of Cassandra's land to a cooperative of small farmers, a decision that would have pleased her father far more than selling to land speculators. She also testified at Holloway's preliminary hearing, facing her family's killer with quiet dignity and unwavering resolve. On their final day in the city, Isaac surprised her by leading her to a small jewelry shop. "If we're to do this properly," he said somewhat nervously, "you should have a ring." The simple gold band he selected wasn't ostentatious, but its understated elegance suited her perfectly. As he slipped it onto her finger, Cassandra felt the last pieces of her broken heart mending, not erasing her grief, but making space alongside it for new joy. They were married in Platteville's small church 2 weeks later, with Sheriff Miller, Thomas, and a handful of Isaac's neighbors as witnesses. Cassandra wore a new blue dress, flowers from the ranch garden in her hair. Isaac, uncomfortable but handsome in a proper suit, stumbled over his vows but spoke them with unmistakable sincerity. As autumn gave way to winter, Cassandra settled fully into ranch life. She learned to ride as well as any man, helped deliver 2 more foals, and survived her first cattle roundup with only minor bruises and immense pride. The money from her father's land sale allowed them to expand the ranch, purchasing additional acreage and better breeding stock. Thomas thrived with Cassandra's influence, improving his reading and mathematics under her nightly tutelage. By spring, he was corresponding regularly with children in Denver and devouring every book they could procure for him. One crisp morning in early April, Isaac found Cassandra at the edge of their property, watching the sunrise paint the distant canyon, the same canyon where they'd first met almost a year before. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly. "Penny, for your thoughts," he murmured against her ear. She leaned back into his embrace, covering his hands with hers. "I was thinking about how everything has come full circle. How that day in the canyon with vultures circling overhead seemed like the end of my story. Instead, it was just the beginning," Isaac finished for her. Cassandra turned in his arms to face him. "I still miss them, my family, I still grieve, but now there's room for happiness too." "That's how it works," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The heart expands to hold both." As they stood together, watching the new day dawn over land that was now truly home, Cassandra felt the baby move within her, another beginning, another promise of life continuing despite loss. In a few months, their child would join this family they'd built, adding another chapter to the story that had begun in that canyon of despair. "What shall we name the baby if it's a boy?" Isaac asked, his hand caressing her belly. Cassandra had been considering this question for weeks. "Daniel, after my father, Daniel Thomas Baxter." Isaac nodded approval. "And if it's a girl, Emma," she said without hesitation, "for the woman who taught you to see beauty in darkness." Tears shone in Isaac's eyes as he pulled her closer. "She would have liked that. Almost as much as she would have liked you." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, where Thomas waited with breakfast preparations underway. The table he'd set held wildflowers in a mason jar, the boy's thoughtful touch that never failed to warm Cassandra's heart. Life on the frontier would never be easy. There would be harsh winters and failed crops, illness and hardship alongside the joys and triumphs. But standing in that kitchen with the two people she loved most in the world, Cassandra knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The vultures that had circled her that day, waiting for her surrender, had been cheated of their feast. Instead, they had witnessed the beginning of a love story that would endure long after the memory of that desperate canyon faded, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its capacity to find hope even in the darkest moments. As summer approached, the ranch flourished under their joint care. Isaac expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for the coming baby and another for Thomas. Cassandra planted a vegetable garden twice the size of the previous years, experimenting with varieties that might thrive in Colorado's climate. Together, they built a life rich in purpose and affection, each day a confirmation of the choice they'd made to face the future as one. In late August, with wildflowers still dotting the hillsides and the first hints of autumn cooling the evening air, Cassandra gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Daniel and Emma, born under a full moon with a neighboring rancher's wife serving as midwife. Isaac paced the porch throughout her labor, his face transforming with wonder and tears when he was finally allowed to enter and meet his children. "Twins," he whispered, cradling one tiny infant in each arm. "Two miracles." Thomas peered at his new siblings with solemn curiosity. "They're so small," he observed. "Will they always be this wrinkly?" Cassandra laughed despite her exhaustion. "No, they'll smooth out soon enough, and then they'll grow so fast you won't believe it." As the years passed, the Baxter ranch prospered. The twins grew strong and healthy, with Daniel inheriting his father's quiet strength and Emma displaying her mother's determination from her first steps. Thomas, at 16, began taking on more responsibility, his natural intelligence and kind heart making him invaluable to the expanding operation. 5 years after the twins' birth, Cassandra stood once more at the canyon's edge, this time surrounded by her family. Daniel and Emma raced along the safe upper path, their laughter echoing across the rocks. Thomas, now a young man considering veterinary studies in Denver, pointed out interesting geological features to them. And Isaac, his hair now threaded with silver but his eyes still that same intense blue, stood beside her with his arm around her waist. "Hard to believe it's been 6 years," he said, gazing down at the spot where he'd found her. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime," Cassandra replied, "a different person entirely." Isaac kissed her temple. "Not entirely different. The core of you was always there, the strength, the compassion. You just needed to rediscover it." She leaned against him, watching their children explore with the fearless curiosity of youth. "Do you think we should tell them the story someday, about the Vultures and how we met?" "Someday," Isaac agreed, "when they're old enough to understand that sometimes our darkest moments lead us to our greatest joys." A vulture soared overhead, its wingspan magnificent against the clear blue sky. Cassandra watched it without fear, seeing now only a creature fulfilling its purpose in the natural order. She had made peace with the symbols of her past, transforming them from harbingers of death to reminders of her journey. "I love you, Isaac Baxter," she said, turning to face the man who had become her partner in every sense. "Thank you for scaring away those birds." He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with genuine happiness. "I love you too, Cassandra Baxter. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep living too." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the canyon in gold and amber hues, they gathered their children and headed home, not to the small cabin of their beginning, but to the thriving homestead they had built together. A testament to love found in the most unexpected circumstances, and hope reclaimed from the edge of despair.